to paradise, where everything is nice. You take me to very, 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 very paradise. Take me to paradise, where everything is nice. You take me to very, 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 very paradise.
Welcome to Stitch and Stillness. Here in Emz Universe, where we learn to crochet slowly, creatively, and one stitch at a time. If you enjoy slow learning and intentional creativity, make sure to subscribe and join the community. In the previous lesson, we explored yarn types and weights and how to comfortably hold your yarn and crochet hook. Now, in today's lesson, we're going to be talking all about gauge and tension, which are two important concepts that affect how your crochet projects turn out. So, to begin, we're going to talk about tension. Now, what is tension? So tension simply refers to how tightly or loosely you hold your yarn while crocheting. Now, I have 3 examples of crochet swatches that have all been crocheted using the exact same number of chains and the exact same number of stitches. But as you will notice, each swatch looks completely different in size. The reason why all 3 swatches have varying differences in them is because the tension is slightly different across each swatch. So, if your yarn is pulled very tightly when you're crocheting, then your stitches will become small and tight. So in this example, you'll notice that these stitches are a lot smaller in comparison to the others. They're a lot tighter and sit a lot more closer together in comparison to the others. They have a little bit of stretch, but the overall size is tiny in comparison to the other 2. Now, if your yarn is very loose when you're crocheting, your stitches will be larger and more open. So this is an example of a swatch that's been made using loose tension, and as you can see, the stitches are a lot bigger in size in comparison to the swatch with tight tension. That gaps in the swatches are a lot bigger as well, and there's obviously an overall increase in the size of the swatch in comparison to the swatch that has the tighter tension. And then lastly, once you've managed to find a good balance between not crocheting with too much of a tight tension, but not crocheting with too much of a loose tension, and finding a happy medium, you end up with a swatch that looks a little bit like this. So as you can see, the stitches all look fairly similar in size. They don't look too tight, they don't look too loose. There is a nice little bit of stretch and give to the swatch. The hole sizes are not too big but not too small, but enough, there's enough room in there. And as you'll see, the overall size of the swatch is somewhere in between the 2 of these. So I do want to highlight is that everyone naturally crochets with a slightly different tension, and that is completely normal. But it's of course about making sure that we find a stitching flow that ensures that our work doesn't come out too tight or too loose, but finds a nice little happy medium here. Now, what is gauge? So gauge describes how many stitches and rows fit into a certain measurement, usually something like 10 centimeters or 4 inches. So patterns will often include a gauge guide so that your finished project turns out the correct size. So with these particular examples of crochet swatches, if we're focusing on the gauge will tell you how many stitches. So your stitches will be these, and how many rows. So your stitches will be the total number of stitches that you have in a row, and the row will count for the entire row. So in this particular swatch, I've done all of them using 10 stitches. I crocheted into the second loop, so that leaves us with 9 stitches. So each swatch has 9 stitches across, and each swatch has a total of 10 rows across the entire swatch. So it'll be 9 stitches by 10 rows. Now, if we was to include this gauge in a pattern, that means that when you are following the same instruction, your swatch, your completed swatch, should also have 9 stitches across and 10 rows. If at the end of creating your swatch you don't end up with 9 stitches, if you end up with less or with more, it means that you haven't chained correctly. And if you end up with more or less rows, then it means that you haven't followed the correct stitch count and row count. When you're practicing, you're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. It's really just about practicing until you feel comfortable with the gauge and tension. And even when you do feel comfortable, it's always good to get into the habit of practicing different things, because you're always learning as you go. So for now, just practice, take things slow, don't put too much pressure on yourself to, worry too much about your tension and your gauge. Just practice, and eventually you will find your own flow. So why does gauge matter? So the reason why gauge matters is because if your tension is tighter than the pattern designer's tension, then your project may turn out smaller. Or if your tension is looser, then your project may turn out a lot bigger. So this becomes especially important when you're making things like clothing, because obviously if you're making clothing for yourself or for somebody else, it's very, very important to make sure that your gauge is accurate. Otherwise, you may run the risk of making a piece for someone that turns out to be too small or too big. A beginner tip that I would give whilst you're kind of starting out on your crochet journey is, honestly, like I said before, not to worry too much about having perfect gauge right away. I would solely just focus on building a comfortable rhythm with your stitches, and over time your tension will naturally become more and more consistent. So just keep going. Honestly, just keep going, just keep taking your time. There's going to be moments where you're going to have to crochet some bits and then unravel them. It's natural, it's normal. I've been crocheting for over 6 years and I still have moments where I have to unpick my work. It happens. But honestly, just take your time. Like, there's absolutely no pressure at all. That wraps up today's lesson. I kept it very short, very sweet. Didn't want to overload you with too much information. In the next lesson, we'll begin learning the core crochet stitches that form the foundation of most crochet projects. So thank you so much for stitching with me today. Again, I hope you found this lesson very helpful, and I will see you in the next episode. And that wraps up today's lesson. Thank you so much for stitching with me. If you enjoyed today's lesson and you want to continue learning with Stitch and Stillness, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Always remember to take your time, keep practicing, and I'll see you in the next stitch. Bye.